Well, welcome to Way2B TV, where there's a better way to be than atheist or theist. My name is Elise Elrod. It's Thursday, February the 25th, 2016. Last week we looked at the Gospel of Judas, and this week we're looking at what is known as the Gospel of Mary. So who was Mary Magdalene? It is thought that she is associated with several different biblical characters. For instance, the woman who anointed Jesus' feet. Christian tradition, over the centuries, developed Mary Magdalene as this sinful woman. Then Christian tradition developed the idea that her sin was that she was a prostitute and was stoned. There is indeed in the Bible a story of an adulterous woman who was brought to Jesus for stoning. There are two problems here. First, again, this woman is not identified at all, much less as Mary Magdalene. Secondly, and more importantly, ancient manuscripts do not contain this story at all. Scholars worldwide agree this story was added by ancient scribes centuries later. There simply is no evidence of a prostitute named Mary Magdalene who washed Jesus' feet and/or was stoned or about to be stoned. Mary Magdalene is mentioned only a dozen times in the Christian Bible. Every mention of her is somewhere within the Passion story. The arrest, the trial, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. That is, except for one story. Mary Magdalene was named in passing as one of those who followed Jesus around and perhaps helped to support him financially. She was among those who first found an empty tomb, and she was the first to see and report a resurrected Jesus. There is one more legend about Mary Magdalene within Christianity. It persists even now. You've heard it already, I think. If you've seen or read the fictional story known as the Da Vinci Code, you know what it is. According to legend, she was married to Jesus and had his child. There simply is no ancient evidence, only legend. Joni, you have anybody on the chat room?
Yeah, I do. Colleen says it was the church that called her a prostitute.
There is huge Christian tradition that there are the 12 apostles and Mary. But there is no ancient evidence that Mary was ever an apostle per se, nor is there ancient evidence that she was ever married to Jesus. Now, as we go through the Gospel of Mary, without question, this is all about Mary being part of the 12.
I like the Da Vinci Code version of Mary Magdalene being married to Jesus.
Yeah, it's a fun fictional story. Christian tradition is one thing, and what the Bible has to say is something else. What else do you have to say?
She says she finds it interesting that the Gospel of Mary has a yin and yang effect, such as the male and female. And Colleen says Peter seemed especially jealous of her. And Jan says sort of goes forward with a patriarch religion, previously which was a matriarchal religion.
Well, wherever you got it.
Colleen. Yes, the loss of the matriarchal changed, it seems, the tone of the Gospels. And Jan agrees. And we're still talking about matriarchal versus patriarchal. And it also has a strong male, but there does not seem to be this lower power struggle as in Christianity.
I think this is kind of what some of you are feeling right now, is that the world should not be so patriarchal. And the world was very patriarchal back then, especially among the writers of the Gospels, not just the canonical Gospels that we have in our Bible, but also the Gnostic Gospels. Only by legend is Mary Magdalene this person that we've been taught. This prostitute, sinful woman who later got stoned. What is the Gospel of Mary? There was a Coptic version found in Egypt in 1896. There are also 2 Greek fragments later found in an Egyptian trash heap in a garbage dump. The Gospel of Mary is not part of the Nag Hammadi library found in 1945. But it is what one might identify as a Gnostic gospel. It did not hit the public until the middle of the 20th century, by the way. Unfortunately, the first 6 pages of the manuscripts are missing, and so we don't see how it started exactly. The document begins in the middle of a Gnostic thought expressed by Jesus. Will matter be destroyed or not? He says. It appears the gospel is recounting an appearance of Jesus after his death. The nature of matter is resolved into the roots of its own nature, he says. That is, the material world isn't going anywhere. For their belief system, the material world was going to just fade away and go back to its roots, as the gospel refers to it. In other words, it would just rot back into the ground. The subject seems to be twofold. First, Jesus appears to be answering the disciples' questions. Secondly, he appears to be giving them instruction on how to go out and share his teaching after his soul departs. The disciples get upset. Look what has happened, they say. He preached this stuff and they killed him. They are not going to let us off for doing the same thing. Then comes Mary Magdalene to the rescue. She comforts them and changes their minds. And then Peter pipes up. He says to Mary, "We know Jesus loved you more than any other woman. Tell us what Jesus shared with you." She begins to tell that vision, and we end in the middle of this sentence. She told me the mind is between the soul and the spirit. And then there are 4 more missing pages in the middle of it. But after the missing pages, there's a discourse concerning the soul. It appears to be part of Jesus' vision for her. It was about how the soul conquers the obstacles to go where it needs to go, in order for the soul to leave and go back to the realm, the divine realm. The Gospel of Mary ends in an interesting way. Mary, having told the disciples what Jesus revealed in her vision, she fell asleep. And while she was asleep, Andrew tells the others, "I, for one, do not believe her. Her teachings are weird. I don't believe Jesus said this." Peter jumped into the conversation. Would Jesus speak privately with a woman instead of bringing what he had to say directly to us? Did he prefer some woman to us? Are we to listen to her? Apparently, Mary woke up. She began to cry. She asked Peter, "Do you think I made it up? Are you saying I'm lying about the Savior?" Then another disciple named Levi chimed in. "Peter, you've always been a hothead. Look at you, railing against her like our adversaries do. If she is good enough for Jesus, she is good enough for us. Don't you think the Savior knows her the best? That's why he loves her more than us. Let's hit the bricks and deliver Jesus' message, like he said." And that's the Gospel of Mary. Joni, I don't know if we've generated any more chats.
Well, howdy.
So let's see what we got on the chats. Jan says, "Given the times, I'm surprised she was given the opportunity to speak." Colleen says, I agree, Jan. But of course she was dismissed as a prostitute. And Jan said, "It's not here. It's not there, but the illusion has been handed down over the generations. It seems that the disciples had to knock her down so as to make her unimportant." Okay, go ahead.
She keeps, Colleen's still talking, "and the scribes who later wrote the Gospels." And then Jan says, "Yes, Colleen, as we understand it in the Bible, and we wonder why other thoughts outside the canonized Bibles have been entertained, because they haven't been. That's the $64,000 question. So much is locked away, Jan, and yet it's being revealed to those who are open to see and hear." And then there's a time lag in there. Jan says, "Mary fell asleep. Perhaps she was drugged." Then she says, "Why would anyone fall asleep during this communication?" Another patriarchal myth. And then Colleen says, "Yes, one of the first times that the spirit was considered apart from the soul. As a small child, in all my religious classes, we were told that our soul was our spirit. Only later, older, was this separateness discussed." Well, with a vision, she could have been in a trance, which would appear as sleep.
Y'all love to speculate. And of course, there's no reason you can't, because that's what they did when they wrote it. And these arguments were going on full bore, for centuries. And while we might consider one group orthodox today, and we might consider the Gnostics heretics today, in reality, in their time, at the time it was being discussed, they just saw what they were saying as their opinion. And they had a right to their opinion, just like the other gospel writers had a right to their opinion. And no one had seen or heard or been witness to what Jesus had to say or what he did. And so when I'm comparing two supernatural stories, I'm not about to tell you which one of them I think is correct, because I don't think either one of them are correct. I think the stories were I don't think either one of them are sinister either. I think what they did in their day was they simply used the supernatural. I think it was common. I think it was the way they communicated. And they made up stories to put with what they were trying to teach or to say, or the points they were trying to make. But they were vying for attention from the population. Both the Gnostics were, and the other forms of Christianities were, and so was those that we now today call Orthodox. In other words, this was a time of upheaval related to many, many, many Christianities. Even Christianity itself would be helped by this, in my opinion, if we were able to simply say, we understand all this, we see all this, and I believe this, but I don't believe that, and all that kind of stuff. That's all good. There's nothing wrong with that. But it would help Christianity to simply be upfront and honest about the existence of all of this material. It's ridiculous to think that the congregations cannot be trusted with this material, and that they need to believe some kind of little, very supernatural, narrow story in order to maintain a steady, stable church environment. They don't. People are wise enough, if you're honest with them, to take what has been offered and to say, I believe this part and I don't believe that part. I'm not sure about this part. That's all good human stuff that would help people live and not be so burdened by religion itself. Read to us, Joni.
Seems like the male vision is different from a female vision, the yin and yang. And Colleen says, yes, very decidedly different. Jan, but the Gospel of Mary taught that the quote-unquote kingdom was within, which is very much what I believe Jesus was teaching us. Colleen, I agree, Jan. She was pretty much the only one who actually seemed to get it. I agree. The church, this is Jan, the church parishioners should be trusted with this information, and they can individually decide what they believe is true or not for them, which is exactly what you were saying.
Absolutely.
Jan says that's a sad statement for Christianity, that Buddhism and whatever that is, Dalai Lama, revere women mothers much more than Christianity. That's a sad statement for Christianity. But at the same time, I don't understand where y'all were talking about earlier, the matriarchal. As far as I know, my religion has never been matriarchal. I think maybe the Catholicism is because of the Virgin Mary, but not in Baptists. After Jan said that's a sad statement for Christianity about the revering mothers anyway, Colleen says that's why I started researching other religious views.
All right, we've got just a few more minutes, and I've still got one more segment. My thing is, do we hear the remnants of the way in the writer of the Gospel of Mary? But the writer of the Gospel of Mary has Jesus saying, there is no sin, but it is you who make sin when you do the things that are like the nature of adultery, which is called sin. The writer of the Gospel of Mary has Jesus saying, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. That's common. But the writer of the Gospel of Mary also has Jesus saying, he who has a mind to understand, let him understand. The writer of the Gospel of Mary has Jesus saying, beware that no one lead you astray, saying, lo here or lo there, for the Son of Man is within you. The writer of the Gospel of Mary has Jesus saying, peace be with you, receive my peace unto yourselves. The writer of the Gospel of Mary has Jesus saying, follow after him. Those who seek him will find him. The writer of the Gospel of Mary has Jesus saying, go then and preach the gospel of the kingdom. the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom within that we talked about in a way. The writer of the Gospel of Mary has Jesus saying, "Do not lay down any rules beyond what I appointed you, and do not give a law like the lawgiver, lest you be constrained by it." I never worry about the context in which these sayings are said in these two supernatural stories, is because I don't believe supernatural stories. And what I'm looking for is the phraseology related to contentment and peace within yourself and living in community with other people. But what do you got on this chat room, Joni?
Jen says, absolutely, we hear the way to be in the Gospel of Mary. Colleen says, walk the walk and talk the talk. And Jan says, amen, sister. I think we need to compile a book of Gospels, etc., that follows Jesus' way to be, parentheses, smile. And Colleen says, I agree wholeheartedly, Jan. Jan says, I guess it would be a matriarchal-based book, smile. Colleen says, yes.
Yeah.
Jesus was saying that to live in the way, we did not need all the laws and restrictions found in Judaism.
Sin is something we ascribe to ourselves. It's something we ascribe to each other. Instead of identifying the outward things that you can physically do and say that cause you to be sinning, okay, the question is, what is the quality of the inward you? And in the world of the Gnostics, does the divine spark have gender? Does the soul have a gender? I think what they're saying is that Mary's divine spark is going the same place as Peter's divine spark. Okay.
And Peter doesn't like it.
Huh? Say what?
And Peter doesn't like it.
No, Peter got a little jealous, didn't he?
And Jan says, I don't think the divine spark has a gender. No,
Right.
it is both and all.
Is the spirit within you, those of you who believe in a spirit, even if you believe in a supernatural spirit, but is the spirit within you, is your persona, is your character, is your ethics, is your motives, is your personality, is what is inside of you, does it have a gender? Really?
No.
Or have we not sociologically fabricated a gender? And women are expected to act like this, and men are expected to act like that.
I don't think either the soul or spirit have an assigned gender. Jan says, however, the quote unquote flesh of humanity does influence religion. Colleen says, very true. Jan says, I think the pronoun he is used because Christianity is a patriarchal religion. And Colleen says, just what I was going to say. Jan says, so does that mean that the Gnostics were truly, quote unquote, all-knowing? Smiling.
Well, the idea behind gnosis, the Greek word gnosis, is knowledge. And so the word Gnostic is simply a term that we gave certain groups of people who've lived in this family of supernatural stories. They didn't all have the exact same story about the divine realm and the gods and the creation, but they were all similar. But the Gnostics, that's a name we gave them. They didn't run around with name tags that said Gnostic on them. Okay? And they didn't run around talking about being Gnostic. They just were people who believed that they knew this special knowledge.
Jan says, and yet the Gospel of Mary is pretty understandable to me anyway. And then Colleen says, I like her gospel too.
I'm going to close out the show. I appreciate you guys being here. We love you, and we're glad that you're around. See you next Thursday on Way to Be TV, where there's a better way to be than atheist or theist.